Well, hello, good morning. Welcome to Coffee and Pumpernickel with Dr. Childress this morning. Today, I'd like to talk about what I'm doing in the family courts. I'm kind of the tip point of the spear on some things, and I think it might be helpful if I describe what I'm doing, and you might be able to sort of follow along or get in the slipstream to my approach and what I'm doing in the family courts. So let me start by just talking about the general issue that's involved, which is the absolutely horrific standards of practice over here. There are none. There are no, there's abject ignorance, no competence, unethical practice, and it's all within the domain of the forensic psychologist. They sort of own you. The pathology, the way the pathology accomplished that is what was by making this type or work with this type of pathology extremely dangerous for the clinical psychologists. So we went away because you're too professionally dangerous to us. The pathology is dangerous, opposing counsel is dangerous, the court system's dangerous. Um, everything about this practicing over here puts our license at risk. So about the 1980s, uh, psychology, professional psychology, separated out court involved family conflict and gave you your own special psychologists and pretty much gave them carte blanche to do whatever they needed to do to protect themselves. And there's a whole big number of issues that arose as a result of that. And essentially, it's produced what we have now, which is abject failure, zero standards of practice, and malpractice, essentially. The forensic psychologists, in many cases, most cases, are colluding with the psychological abuse of the children and with the pathology in the family. And in most cases, the forensic psychologists are making recommendations to the court that has the court also participating in the child abuse and the pathology in the family because of the incompetence of the forensic psychologists. So, as a clinical psychologist, I'm not from this world. You can look at my Vita. I'm dropped in from the outside, tumbled down the rabbit hole. And when I started to look around, I've been here for 10 years. Okay, so and I'm on a linear path. So we've reached a certain point, and things will be shifting. When I first got here, I looked around and did my analysis of what the problem is. And it was pretty clear. It's the incompetence of my psychology people, the forensic psychologists. The PAS people are a fringe component, they're basically noise. But where are the psychologists, the real psychologists? They're the forensic child custody evaluators. And they're basically just over here exploiting families for their money with their big behemoth $20,000 to $40,000 custody evaluations that solve nothing. They don't diagnose the pathology, they don't treat it. They're pretty pointless. And that's why you can just look at history of 40 years of unsolved family conflict. Um, I, 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 just so you're aware, this is a book by Simon and Stahl from 2020 called Forensic Psychology Consultation in Child Custody Litigation. It's a handbook for work product review, case presentation, and expert testimony, published by the American Bar Association. So this is sort of the forensic psychologist handbook of doing child custody evaluations. They have another one from 2013. I've read them. Okay, so I know what they think they're doing, and I would welcome the opportunity to debate with either Dr. Simon or Dr. Stahl, the relative role of clinical versus forensic psychology in the family courts because they misrepresented clinical psychology and created straw man arguments for the existence of forensic psychology. And then that by self acknowledgement of them, there are significant problems in forensic psychology. And this is from 2020. And so even after 40 years from 1980 to 2020, there's still significant problems. Primary of which is they are simply not competent in the knowledge they need to be. They've exempted themselves from all standards of practice, ethical standards, competence standards, whatever they get to do, whatever they want to do. Uh, and the reason for that is the people who should be enforcing standards of practice, the licensing boards, are controlled by the very forensic psychologists who they are reviewing. So the the board complaint against the forensic psychologist is reviewed by another forensic psychologist who's doing the same thing, and they protect their own and they just continue to do. Where's the APA? The APA is also owned by the forensic division and the forensic psychologists. They populate the committees and everything, and they have a thought disorder. Probably not a full disorder, but there's definite problems in linear logical reasoning, foresight and planning ahead, and self-reflective insight. So there's definite issues in the executive function systems of forensic psychologists, and I will be encountering them going forward and making this information known to them that there is a thought disorder, illogical thought processes going on with them. And I've been here for 10 years. And when I came here, I'm an outsider. And I'm a clinical psychologist in forensic psychology world. That's extraordinarily dangerous. The pathogen wants to get at me. The opposing party, the opposing parent, the cross-examining attorneys want to discredit me, and the forensic psychologists will want me to go away because I'm exposing their ignorance and incompetence. So it is immensely dangerous for me as a clinical psychologist to be here. But when I first arrived, this is my pathology: trauma and child abuse. That's where I come from. Right just before jumping into private practice, I was clinical director, 3 university assessment and treatment center for children 0 to 5 in the foster care system. CPS, Child Protective Services, was our primary referral in. We were funded by Department of Mental Health. We had 3 universities involved, and I was a clinical head of this treatment center for children in foster care. And that's spot on attachment pathology, especially 0 to 5. And then I drop over here and I recognize the child abuse. I recognize the shared delusional disorder, the factitious disorder imposed on the child, cross-generational coalition, emotional cutoff, because I'm competent. So within the first session of meeting with the child and the targeted parent, I had this diagnosed. But then I encountered the family court system and the current forensic psychology system, and they don't know what they're doing. And why is that? And I started to unwrap why that is. And it's a failure of competence. Well, why are they failing in competence? The licensing board should be enforcing that. Okay, the licensing board is being controlled by the forensic psychologist. So I started on a path to return professional competence to court-involved psychology. I'm an old clinical psychologist. I've worked in nearly every capacity with nearly every pathology. This is my pathology: trauma and child abuse. I've experience in delusional thought disorders, in factitious disorders, and I'm senior staff. I've been clinical director for 2 projects. the clinic there, and also a FEMA and DOJ project to develop an assessment protocol. So I'm senior staff. I know a lot of stuff. I'm competent in multiple relevant domains. So if not me, who? Who's going to return clinical psychology back to the courts, if not me? So that's what I did. I started on a path to return clinical psychology to court-involved family practice. So I'm the only one over here. And you can look at the discrepancy between me and what you find in the forensic field. That's the difference between a clinical psychologist and a forensic. I'm not special. I kind of am, but I'm not. I know a lot. But so does Jim Swanson about ADHD or Keith Nectarline about schizophrenia. I've worked with top people who know what they're doing, and Vander Koch um, and others. It's just Tronic. Ed Tronic did the still face studies on attachment, immensely relevant to what we have in the family courts. When I was a clinical director of the treatment center, I asked the county to bring out Ed Tronic to do some seminars for the county on attachment pathology and the relationship, parent-child relationship. And so Ed Tronic came out as a consultant for our clinic. Okay, so I've worked with top people in the field, and clinical. So I'm not unique in the world of clinical psychology that I'm used to, but holy cow, am I different than what you find in these forensic psychologists that surround you. So I'm bringing back standards of practice. One of the implications of that, though, is that the forensic psychologists are colluding with the child abuse, and because of their ignorance and incompetence and unethical practice. So if I reach this point where I'm actually in the family courts, then I'm going after their license because they are ignorant, incompetent child abusers, lazy, and unethical, violating multiple ethical standards of practice. But to get here, I had to give them every opportunity to self-correct. And so I presented to the AFCC, I petitioned to the APA, written a book, done everything that I needed to do to make sure that I was on solid ground. So now we're here. Now I'm in the family courts. As a testifying expert in the family courts, that has implications. And I've been developing that role for about 7, 8 years, here and there, developing my reports, developing my analysis, how I approach analysis of forensic reports and those sorts of things. And testifying, being cross-examined, doing assessments, being cross-examined about various things. So I've been here for a while. And so my approach is fairly refined at this point. And what I do when I get a forensic custody evaluation, I consider that a big package. It's fairly time consuming for me. But when I do a review of a forensic custody evaluation, I will do a line by line review on my first reading. So as I'm reading it for the very first time, I will be responding as a clinical psychologist to the information that's being presented. Those are my notes. Those will be Appendix 1 to my summary report. So I'm going to base my opinion on my clinical notes that will be extracted from the first reading. And in doing that, I'm extracting both the symptoms and what the implications are of all those possible symptoms, as well as the practice standards of the psychologist. Now, I know it's going to be open to cross-examination. Everybody fights in the court. So I developed a checklist of applied knowledge, which is 6 domains of professional knowledge that should be applied pursuant to Standard 2.04 of the APA Ethics Code, bases for scientific and professional judgments. So there's 6 of those, and then I included a page on diagnosis, what diagnosis was made, what symptoms, possible diagnoses were relevant based on the symptom, and then a page on treatment planning. Does the treatment plan match the diagnosis and various things like that? Um, remember, not remember, but I have taught these courses at a graduate level. So I've taught diagnosis and assessment. I've taught treatment planning. I've taught research methodology. I've taught psychometrics of assessment. So I know these courses. So it's like getting a review from Professor Childress of your paper. And these forensic psychologists probably do not want their paper reviewed by Dr. Childress. But I go through a line by line on that, extract all the information about practice standards, and then I write my summary report based on that situation. Now, that will be encountering one-on-one Dr. Childress with a forensic psychologist somewhere. And the reports that I generate, I have obligations to my client under standard 1.05 for ethical violations and reporting ethical violations. I figure my 1.04 informal notification regarding ethical violations will be covered with my summary report. That'll get to the forensic psychologist and make them aware of their deficiencies or their apparent deficiencies. But 1.05 is that if it doesn't correct the situation, and it's not likely to, then I take additional steps. My approach to that is to provide the parent with a sufficient reporting of the standards of practice violations so that they can take it to the licensing board and the malpractice potentially. Now, if they take it to the licensing board, they submit their complaint supported by my report to the licensing board. The licensing board is forensic psychologists. So they will be reading my report that is basically about their report because they all do the same thing, which will put the licensing board forensic psychologists in an interesting position. In Oregon, the licensing board responded to a report of mine that was used in support of an ethical violation to the board. So the parent made a board complaint, used my report in support, and the board sanctioned me and did not investigate the forensic psychology. They want me to go away from Oregon, so I'm gone. I'm not accepting any clients, parents, attorneys, mental health people from Oregon from now until forever. So Oregon's dark to me. But that's the approach right now of the licensing boards. They are protecting their own and they're covering up for the ignorance and incompetence. And that should be relatively obvious if we have such a massive failure in professional competence in one field, forensic psychology, that's not present in ADHD or autism or schizophrenia or anywhere else. But one field has absolutely zero standards of practice, multiple violations to the APA Ethics Code. Who's responsible for enforcing that? Licensing board. They're failing. Yeah. And they're failing in one specific area because they're allowed to self-review. So that's going to get kind of exposed, falderall kind of stuff going on. So I imagine over the course of the next couple of years, I'm going to get the attention of the forensic psychologists. And when they do, that's that self-reflective insight failure. When they do, they're going to encounter that their failures, their incompetence for decades has been colluding with and participating in the psychological abuse of children. And they are the abusers, and they're going to have to acknowledge that. It's kind of be a little bit like 1945 Germany. So when I say shame is coming, it is, and I'm bringing it. I'm shaming the licensing boards. Why is Dr. Childress out here having to enforce ethical standards of practice? Where are the licensing boards? They're the ones that should be doing it. But so I'm shaming the licensing boards by exposing the massive malpractice and massive ethical violations over here. So so that's the line by line review. Uh, in addition, just personally, just interestingly, I have gone through a frequent cross examination so far, and um, no one's really gotten anything yet because I don't have an opinion. The opposing counsel thinks I have an opinion, so they try to find flaws in my opinion. I apply knowledge to the evidence, just like a judge applies the statutes um, to the evidence in the courts. I apply the diagnostic criteria to the symptom evidence. And there's research support and there's precedent support. But I don't have an opinion. I apply knowledge to the information. And so for me, cross-examination, a lot of times, all the time, is basically a quiz. Okay, you can ask me about any domain of pathology, any ADHD, autism, court-involved stuff. Ask me any questions about assessment treatment, and I'll give you the answers from professional psychology. It's like a test, um, and so it's stressful because I have to watch my wording precisely. Then there's another category of cross-examination where they try to slander my reputation somehow and bring up various things on that. And I don't think that's been particularly effective. Um, you can cloud the waters. It used to be able to cloud the waters, but it's getting less and less so. Um, yeah, I don't want to go into Jean Mercer, but Jean Mercer is out there, and she's old, and hopefully she will just move on. But she will be. I have information. I have documentation on Jean Mercer misleading the court and the effects of that kind of thing. And so Jean Mercer is essentially colluding with the child abuse of the children, and I can support that with documentation. And she's being cited in the professional literature. I've seen her name cited a couple of times. And she's, in my view, a child abuser, and I would support that with documentation. So but I don't want to go too far there. I also have a defamation lawyer on retainer specifically for Dr. Mercer, and the attorney has already reviewed the history information. So hopefully Gene just kind of moves away from things and we can return to professional practice. But the attorneys in the family courts are an interesting group. They work case by case on things, and they have a zealous advocate kind of mindset. And both of those are a little problematic here, but I'll deal with the attorneys in a separate talk. Uh, so as a court-involved clinical psychologist, I apply knowledge, okay? And that's the standard that we will establish. I don't want to hear your opinion. I want to hear I want to see the application of knowledge that results in your professional judgment. Okay, so that's standard 2.04 of the APA Ethics Code. If you do not apply knowledge, you are in violation of standard 9.01 bases of assessment, that your opinions as contained in your reports, recommendations, diagnostic and evaluative statements, including your forensic testimony, are not based on information and techniques sufficient to substantiate your findings. And 9.01 specifically cites back to 2.04. So the information is attachment, personality pathology, family systems, complex trauma and child abuse, child development, delusional thought disorders. That's the information you should be applying. And the technique would be the mental status exam of thought and perception. Now, none of these forensic people know how to do a mental status exam with thought and perception. Not many people do. It's a sort of a specialty domain that's limited to assessing delusional thought disorders. And I have that background, but they don't. So they're not competent in the information or techniques, and they're going to be running like head on into that wall that zero of them are competent. Now, the interesting part of that, so that's a violation of 2.01, boundaries of competence. They're violating, they're not competent, violation of 2.01. Therefore, they're not applying knowledge, to violation of 2.04. Therefore, their opinions are wrong, violation 9.01. So I got 3 ethical violations right there. And then they didn't conduct a proper risk assessment for possible child abuse. It's a differential diagnosis. Either the targeted parent is abusive or the allied parent is abusive. They didn't conduct a proper risk, so that's a failure in their duty to protect. And in my line by line review, I pull out they should have. Look at all these symptoms. It's looking like child abuse. It's looking like a shared delusion. So, so the forensic custody evaluators are going to be running into a wall of issues. And the fact that they have not stayed current with Dr. Childress, I've been here for 10 years. It's not my job to educate them. Okay? And that's kind of get that through your head. It's not my job to educate them. It's their job to already know. I know that, and they know that. Now, all you parents and all you people out there in the court system are like in a movement. You want to convince somebody there's this new pathology, parental alienation, and you're no. That the pathogen has you caught trying to prove something to someone. And then it gives you this awful diagnostic model of PAS that can't be proven. And so it's got you totally caught in that mindset. No, you just need the professionals to do their job. You need the doctors to be competent. You shouldn't have to be explaining the pathology to a doctor. The doctor should be explaining it to you. That's totally, and you see how messed up that is, that you have to educate your doctor about what the pathology is and then educate them about what the treatment. Oh my goodness, it is a mess over here. A saying that I live by is don't try to teach a pig to sing. It just frustrates you and annoys the pig. I'm not here to teach choir lessons to these forensic incompetent psychologists who are simply not motivated. And standard 2.03 is maintaining competence. So I'll add 4 onto there. I can add, avoiding harm is number 5 ethical violation on that. Principle D, injustice, is number 6 on that. An entire principle of ethics is being violated by the forensic custody evaluator, and they don't care. Nor does the APA. And there's reasons for that. There's reasons why the APA doesn't care. So, so I'm bringing back standards of practice, but I'm bringing them back by senior staff. By senior staff review of their reports and commentary about the standards of practice evidenced Professor Childress. Now, for competence, let me talk a little bit about just the issue of competence, because that's going to be coming slam bam right to the fore, is they are not competent in the attachment system. The attachment system is basically 0 to 5, and the more they've worked in forensic world, the less competent they are, the awfuler they are. That means they've misdiagnosed the pathology for 10 years or 20 years. So the longer they've been here, the worse it is for them. They have been a failure for 10 years, 20 years. It's better if you're a new forensic psychologist than adjust over to knowledge quickly and move into knowledge instead of expertise, self-proclaimed expertise. So they're not competent in the attachment system. I am. I have 0 to 5 background. I worked in the foster care system with 0 to 5. I am competent in the attachment system and attachment pathology, and they're not. They're not competent in delusional thought disorders. That's a domain basically of schizophrenia, maybe bipolar disorder, but delusional thought disorders is not something that the general psychologists kind of run into, especially these forensic people. So they're not competent in the assessment of delusional thought disorders. I am. I had 12 years working on a schizophrenia project, trained annually to the zero point 0.9 diagnostic reliability to the authors of the brief psychiatric rating scale, which I recommend be brought in and be used to document symptoms. But I am competent in the mental status exam of thought and perception and the diagnosis of delusional thought disorders. They're not competent in family systems therapy. They apply a two-person attribution of causality. Is it the parent causing the child's? No, it's a three-person triangle. It involves a cross-generational coalition and emotional cutoff. 40 years of forensic psychology, they have not educated the court or the public about cross-generational coalitions, emotional cutoffs, and triangles. It takes Dr. Childress coming in to educate everybody about family systems therapy. They're not competent in family systems therapy, yet they're assessing a family. Holy Toledo. They're not competent in child abuse and trauma. They've been working on these custody reports and $20,000 to $40,000. They never worked child abuse. I have. I'm competent in child abuse. I've worked with all four DSM child abuse diagnoses, and I've led the treatment teams for all four of those child abuse diagnoses that have included CPS, social worker involvement. I know child abuse and complex trauma up close and personal. They're not. Zero. And they don't know factitious disorder imposed on another. That is the pathology, a false pathology imposed on the child. Factitious disorder imposed on another. It's a shared persecutory delusion, a false attachment pathology imposed on the child for manipulative secondary gain of nullifying the court's decisions about child custody. It's a dark personality pathology that's manipulating the courts and manipulating the forensic people, manipulating everybody. A Machiavellian level of manipulation. And they're not competent in factitious disorder. None of them have diagnosed it. It's been in the DSM. None of them are diagnosing that. I've worked children's hospitals. I am. The children's hospitals, we are trained in the assessment and diagnosis of factitious disorder imposed on another, Munchausen by proxy, because it shows up in children's hospitals. The false creation of a pathology for secondary gain of all the doctor attention. So I'm competent in attachment, delusional thought disorders, family systems therapy, complex trauma and child abuse, and factitious disorder imposed on another. They are not competent in any of them. So what's going to happen? All of a sudden, right now, starting now, we have one psychologist in the family courts who knows what they're doing. Me, a clinical psychologist who's competent in the domains of pathology. And we have all, all, all of the forensic psychologists who are not competent in any of those domains. So, knowing this is coming, because I have foresight and planning ahead, knowing this is coming, that this will be exposed, their corruption will be exposed, their ignorance will be exposed, the incompetence and the exploitation will be exposed. All of that is coming. It's going to be exposed. Shame is coming. I created some instruments, and they're within the ABPA, an attachment-based model of parental alienation. So I described what that was in Foundation so everybody can read it and peer review it as much as you want. And I created some instruments. The diagnostic checklist for pathogenic parenting, that 3 symptoms for the child, 4 with the phobia. And I created the parenting practices rating scale to document the parenting practices of the targeted parent, and the parent-child relationship rating scale as an outcome measure to monitor treatment. And clinical psychologists, we do this stuff all the time. Psychologists are the ones who are trained to develop assessment instruments. That's what we do, like the weeek for, intelligence, or the MMPI. That's psychologists are trained to do that. I'm trained to do that. And I was a clinical director for a FEMA DOJ project to develop an assessment protocol for fire setting, juvenile fire setting in the courts, a forensic pathology. And I developed an assessment protocol for that. Developing assessment protocols is what I know how to do. Okay, so I gave you three instruments that you're going to need because I'm scaffolding the ignorance, current ignorance and incompetence up to competence, basic competence. We're going to have a gap there. And so we can't have zero mental health people out there, which would be ethically required because none of them meet boundaries of competence. So I've given them instruments and a scaffolding up. But because this is the courts, everybody fights about everything. So they're still fighting about Dr. Childress and his instrument. No, if you complete the diagnostic checklist, parenting practices rating scale, you complete those two, you can absolutely produce an accurate diagnosis. I'm spoon feeding the forensic psychologist in their just do these two little simple things, three symptoms. And now each one of those three symptoms on the diagnostic checklist is by itself diagnostic. So personally, I can make the diagnosis from any one of those three symptoms. I gave you three of them because I knew you'd be a little tentative at first about this. So it's by giving you three, you'd be able to stand on a more solid base for your security. So the first one, attachment pathology towards a normal range parent, never happens. A normal range parent, a bad parent produces insecure attachment that more strongly motivates the child to bond to the parent. A normal range parent, the attachment system wants to bond to that parent. It's a primary motivational system of the brain. Never happens. It's not an authentic brain. So if I've got a child rejecting a normal range parent, it's a false disorder. It's a factitious disorder because that parent's not producing it. 5, narcissistic personality symptoms in a child. We don't see that. Narcissistic personality pathology is an adult pathology. In childhood, it's an insecure attachment. You don't see narcissistic personality symptoms in a child. I chose 5 of them because 5 is the criteria for personality disorder in the DSM. And I specified each one. I didn't say 5 narcissistic, I said 5 specific ones. You will see an absence of empathy, that's cruelty. So you assess for the capacity for cruelty. You'll see a haughty and arrogant attitude. You'll see a grandiosity of the child empowered to judge a parent as if the parent was a child. And those are kind of part of that inverted hierarchy of the family system stuff. You'll see a sense of entitlement, that the child expects the parent to meet the child's needs to the child's satisfaction. That's all your inverted hierarchy. And then you'll see splitting, which is the polarization into extremes of all good and all bad, and also a rigidity of thinking, that once things are defined, they do not change. No, nothing will ever change about this. That's splitting. It's a rigidity of thinking into these poles. You never see that pathology in a child, narcissistic personality pathology. It's coming because it's a parent who has that pathology and the parent's controlling the child. Those are the psychological fingerprints of control. So now you got to, and to give an indication, if I'm giving you 5 specific symptoms to look for, I know this pathology extremely well. If I'm just going and saying, look, here, 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 and here. The third symptom is a delusion. The child has a persecutory delusion. Again, that's a one symptom diagnosis. If the child has a persecutory delusion towards a normal range parent, there's only one place you check with the allied parent. Yep, there it is. It's a shared persecutory delusion. So any one of those symptoms is diagnostic. I gave you three of them. Check, 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 check. Simple, easy peasy. And so I think it should be done routinely. You just do a diagnostic checklist, put it in the child's chart, report what the symptoms are to the court. Now, the rule out diagnosis is that the targeted parent is abusive. Okay, so let's document that using the parent-child relationship ratings. No, the parenting practices rating scale. It divides things into four levels: abusive range, severely problematic, normal range problematic, or normal. But basically, it's two categories: abusive range, normal range. And then I give even individual little things so you can document exactly what the problem is with that parent. If that parent has a problem, let's get very, very specific. And then let's just say, are they in level 1 or 2? Or are they level 3 or 4? If they're in level 3 or 4, they're not abusive. And if they're level 1 and 2, they are. So let's document that half of the differential diagnosis. Is the targeted parent abusive? If they are, let's document what the child abuse is, put it on a treatment plan, and fix it. If they're not, let's document that they're not, and now we're looking at a possible persecutory delusion, shared persecutory delusion. So between the parenting practices rating scale and the diagnostic checklist, if that symptom constellation presents, absolutely, we're looking at a factitious disorder imposed on another. We're looking at the shared persecutory delusion. We're looking at the Machiavellian manipulation of a dark personality. So, but that's just being helpful. Okay, I'm not going to fight about it. If the forensic psychologists want to fight about it, they can do a mental status exam of thought and perception. That's an assessment for delusional thought disorder. So they're going to fight with me about from their ignorance and say, then do a mental status exam of thought and perception and apply Bowlby and Mnuchin and Beck and apply the knowledge, because I'm going through your reports line by line looking for it. And we're looking for malpractice. And so you can either jump to professional competence and know what you need to know, which you can't do because you're not competent, you haven't trained, you haven't studied, you haven't, or you can start listening to Dr. Childress and start doing the right thing, because I am competent. And so being involved in the court right now, I am in a one-on-one, up close and personal discussion with the forensic psychologists. And this discussion will continue for years until it reaches resolution. And pathogen denies. So you can see that with the Gardner PAS people. They won't engage me because they know what's going to happen. I will expose their ignorance and incompetence. Same as with the forensic psychologists. They're not going to want to engage me because I'm going to expose them to malpractice lawsuits because they haven't been doing it in the past. For 40 years, they have failed to make the diagnosis of FDIA. It's been in the DSM. They failed to make the diagnosis of a shared persecutory delusion. And that was in the DSM-4. So they've failed for 40 years diagnostically. So it's a tough time for me. It's not a happy time for me. I don't like being here. I don't like doing this. I wish we were more on solutions rather than me beating up my professional colleagues for their ignorance and incompetence. But we need standards of practice here. The court deserves it, the children deserve it, and the basic level of standards is the ethics code of the American Psychological Association. That needs to be baseline. Then from there, we can build expertise. But so far, nobody over here is even competent with this pathology, which speaks a lot about 40 years of forensic psychology and its failure. So, in addition to the domains of competence that I just listed for myself, look at me, an old guy, is research. Now, I have a PsyD degree. Now, PsyD degree sacrifices the research training in their doctorate program for additional clinical training. So I'm a clinical psychologist expertise kind of guy, which is and why I'm um, got so many domains of competence. Uh, and so you're not going to see on my Vita, you don't see the strength of publications. You should see no publications on my side, the journal publications. It's all going to be work experience because that's what I do. But I have been at high levels of research my entire life. Worked 12 years with Keith Nectarline, NIMH study on schizophrenia. Trained, that's where I was trained in the diagnostic assessment of delusional thought disorders. The, I could tell you stories about Keith's stature, but let me give you this story. When I joined the project, they had an office in Westwood Village, small little office. But universities like NIMH researchers, people bringing in large grants like that, longitudinal study, because the university gets a cut of each grant for overhead and various things, and it improves the prestige of the university. And so Harvard University offered Keith a position out there. And we were all kind of, we're with Keith. Ooh, are we going to move back to Boston with Keith, or what's going to happen? And then UCLA was building these brand new, beautiful medical plaza suites near the medical center. They gave Keith an entire floor of this new 300 medical plaza center. They gave him the third floor for his labs and everything, and he got to design, and I got to design some of the stuff on the lab stuff, just so he would stay there. That he was a prominent researcher, still is, in schizophrenia, one of the top. And I worked there 12 years. And my role was managing all things data. Okay, so I had three research staff who worked under me, sometimes students, and I was kind of managing the data from the data in to the data out and all things data in between. And there was multiple sites, other investigators, all sorts of stuff. So I know research really, really well. And I could have stayed with that project, but then it was my master's degree. My son was born. I went back for a doctorate in clinical, which is always where I wanted to go. Then, after I left the postdoc, I was recruited out of my postdoc for Children's Hospital of Orange County to work with Jim Swanson at UCI Child Development Center on ADHD. Jim Swanson is a top guru in ADHD research. Everybody over here talks about um, randomized controlled studies, right? Okay. Jim Swanson was the lead site, one of the lead sites for the MTA study of ADHD in the 90s, the considered the best randomized control study of a pathology ever. Was looking at medication for behavioral treatments and combinations. 6 sites involved, top researchers from across the country. Jim was one of the principal investigators, lead sites on that randomized control study. I wasn't part of that study. I came in the 2000s. That study ended in the 1990s. They recruited me because Jim was dropping below into preschoolers. So they brought me on for my preschool, early childhood background. But I worked with his NIMH MTA team, Steve Simpson, other people on the team, and and so I'm well familiar with that caliber of research professional and research stuff, and that just being around Jim produced a fourth author. I'm fourth author on a journal article in the Clinical Neuroscience Research. And the first author was Leanne Tam. She was my colleague. They hired one psychologist from UCI. I was a psychologist on chalk. And she wrote the paper. Jim Swanson, who was the Grand High Kahuna, Mark Lerner, who was the medical director at UCI, and I'm number 4. And the reason I'm number 4 is because I ran the project. I was the clinical side, and then all the other people are people I kind of supervised and ran. Now, I could have stayed there and just been producing journals and being part of that. But I was recruited out of there to go be the clinical director for this new treatment center, county treatment center for children in foster care. So I know research, and I've had other research projects. Elizabeth Dykins, I worked at UCLA with her on Williams syndrome and Prader-Willi syndrome. I worked on a attention remediation research project, multi-site at Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. So I know research, and research is coming. Now, those forms, one of the reasons I talk about that is those forms, the diagnostic checklist and the parenting practices rating scale and the parent-child relationship rating scale are all designed for research. They're going to fit so well. The diagnostic checklist is the operational definition for the pathology, documenting the parenting practices of the targeted parent for your research study, and then giving you an outcome measure, a beautiful outcome measure. That parent-child relationship rating scale is a beautiful outcome measure. Monitors 3 brain systems, not behavior, brain systems: affection, attachment, cooperation, emotional regulation, social involvement, mood, and arousal. And it gets pretty sensitive in capturing that. And it's a great outcome measure. I recommend it should be used in all the treatment kind of situations here. So we're set up for research coming into. It's no coincidence that there has been no application of knowledge in the courts in 40 years, and that there has been no research in the courts in 40 years. ADHD has research, autism has research, schizophrenia has research, every other pathology has research. The courts are zero. They have opinion pieces. Everybody's writing opinion pieces. Yeah, so research is going to be coming over here once we get over here. The shared delusion, they're going to love. We have a shared delusion and dark personality sort of in a concentrated place. Oh, the researchers are going to love that once they get the ability to get in here. Right now, forensic psychology has you in a bubble. They have you isolated from everybody. As I enter the courts, just sort of closing up here, as I enter the courts, the key issue is going to be my credibility with the court. So I've spent 10 years now building my credibility, and so we'll get into that. The opposing counsel can look at it. But what I'm doing is I'm staying within my lane. Everybody got out of their lanes. Forensic psychologists left being doctors and started being mini judges deciding on custody. But the moment they stop diagnosing pathology, then the court has to diagnose pathology. And now they're out of their lane. And so everybody's doing I'm getting back to my world, clinical psychology. I don't deal with custody. It's diagnosis and treatment. What's the problem? I'll tell you what the problem is, and I'll tell you how to fix it. And so it's diagnosis and treatment. I disagree with forensic psychology withholding diagnoses from the court and not diagnosing pathology, not identifying what the problem is with the court. So part of my role as a clinical psychologist is to educate the court about what the pathology is. So each one of my reports, I am educating the court. The implication of that is once the judge is aware of what the pathology is, the judge is aware of that for the next case and the next case and the next case and the next case. And so by educating the judge once, I've educated the judge for all future cases as well. So that's what my reports are doing. They're a combination of educating the court and discussing the professional practices of the psychologist, exposing the malpractice there. The other thing that my reports may be doing is giving the court an idea of what they should be getting. This is the quality of professional assessment and report you should be getting, and this is the quality you are getting. And hopefully the court will start to ask for a higher quality of professional practice. The To close up here, um, get on with my day, is uh, all of this has to do with disrupting the homeostatic balance of the system. That systems, this is from systems research and everything, systems are stable with the symptom present. The symptom is stabilizing a dysfunctional system. You cannot remove the symptom because every aspect of the system will fight you because it needs the symptom to stabilize itself. The symptom in this case is the ignorance of the forensic psychology people. That's the symptom, their incompetence. We cannot remove their incompetence because every aspect of the system will seek to maintain their ignorance and incompetence. And because it's stabilizing. The moment we remove their incompetence, no one's competent over here. The whole system collapses. There is no competence here. So we need the incompetent psychologist because otherwise we have no psychologists. And so the symptom is stabilizing a dysfunctional system. What I'm doing is I'm collapsing the system. I'm collapsing, disrupting the homeostatic balance. So everything's going to go into chaos for a little bit. Then the system will reorganize back into order. As it does so, we can take the symptom out and guide it back into a healthy organization. So as it first it'll go into some chaotic period here, and then as it starts to reorganize, we're going to take out the symptom of ignorance and incompetence and put in competence and knowledge. And that's correcting the system. So that's exactly what I'm doing. People think, oh, we're to have a movement and, get to this and that and the other thing. There's 1,000 things that can be done. Contacting your legislators, things like that. Filing licensing board complaints. Let the licensing board complaints cover up over and over again. Collusion, expose the collusion on the licensing boards. Get your legislature to look at why aren't the licensing boards enforcing ethical standards? Why is Dr. Childress doing their job? Get on the APA. Why are they allowing the unethical practice? What are they doing about it? And there's things other things that can be done, but that's what I'm doing. I'm in the court system right now, banging heads with my professional colleagues around issues of competence. Ultimately, don't try to teach a pig to sing. It just frustrates you and annoys the pig. I'm looking to just wipe the slate clean of the ignorant and incompetent forensic psychologists. They've demonstrated their ethics, which are abhorrent. They've demonstrated their professional practices, which are abhorrent, and they are absolutely stone cold ignorant. So, my cuckoo clock. So, what we're going to be doing, what I anticipate doing, is bringing in dialectic behavior therapy, one of the most empirically validated therapies out there. It's for borderline. It will need a little bit of adaptation to the court, but DBT, bring in knowledge, and then we can expand on that knowledge as appropriate. But they're going to have applied behavioral analysis. They have a wonderful mindfulness component. And we get an accurate diagnosis, factitious disorder imposed on another, child psychological abuse, shared persecutory delusion, dark personality, Machiavellian manipulation of the court. We'll identify the pathology, diagnose the problem, and then dialectic behavior therapy, a variant. I'd like to add emotionally focused therapy principles for the attachment work. So that's where I'm headed. The application of knowledge to resolve the pathology, and I'm going to be exposing the ignorance and incompetence within forensic psychology, and it's going to crash the system. Then what's going to happen off the crash? I recommend that people start listening to me because I am the only one competent with all this pathology, and I know exactly what I'm talking about. I've given you 12 associated clinical signs. I am predicting words, exact words that the pathology uses. Oh, we should listen to the child. We should allow the child to decide on visitation. How many times have you heard that? We should allow the child to decide on visitation. I know I can explain exactly where that sentence comes from. It's a pattern. It's a pattern. We shouldn't force the child to go on visitations. The use of the word forced. It's a pattern. I can tell you exactly where that comes from. So at some point, people need to start, the forensic people, the psychology people, need to start listening to me and listening to knowledge and the app. You can listen to me, or you can go directly to the knowledge, one way or the other. But you can't. You're not allowed to be ignorant and incompetent and participate in the child abuse anymore. That's not possible. So with that, happy Sunday. I'm gonna go off to my day, and good luck with you on working things out. We'll see you next Sunday.